Okay, everybody. Enjoy a little bit of lunch while you learn. So we're going to take a look at the system audit, best practices, how to be able to extract information from your Laserfiche system to use it more efficiently, clean up the repository. And a lot of these tests and a lot of the features that we're going to look at are what we use when we generate your system audit or system review that we do every year. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ryan Padalita, our account manager for the Pacific Northwest. And thanks again, everybody, for coming. And don't forget to drop your name badge in the bag to win the giveaway today.
Okay, well, thank you, Patrick. This next presentation is going to mostly cover the system audit, but we're going to go a little bit beyond that. Now, we've been throwing the word system audit around, and I want to start by getting kind of a baseline. How many here have had Cities Digital Performance System audit before you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a couple, probably about half the room, it looks like. I should mention, firstly, that this is a free service that we offer. And what we're trying to accomplish is that we want to get a baseline understanding of some of the actions of how your repository is functioning and to make you understand where things are at. Now, the nice thing about this is we're not going to do this just once, but we can do this annually. So you can get your report, compare it, make necessary adjustments, kind of see how you've grown, and kind of work with your system to be a little bit healthier, I guess is the best way to put it. So the typical goals are we're trying to generate facts about the system, how it's going to be used. Getting into the problems early, that's a really, really important point about this. Some of the solutions we have can be not as easy, and the easiest way to solve the problem is not to have the problem, and maybe if we work on getting things solved going forward, we can see the biggest results with the least amount of effort. The repositories are only as good as the information that are in them, so we're trying to eliminate useless clutter, things that don't have any value to the system, do more best practices around the different products that we have. And ultimately, and that I should have put a star by that. Since we got Laserfiche got stars, I should have stars in my presentation. But number 6, starting a dialogue about improvement, because these things that we're going to talk about today are just scratching the surface. But if you start looking internally about improving your processes, about bringing other people on board with improving those processes, starting conversations about making changes, understanding the product better, I think that's where the real value of doing something like this is. So, Cities Digital, we've got a tool. Now, I was not allowed to show you the actual script, but this is kind of how I imagine it was. Like, we've got, what it does is it's going to run a lot of these searches automatically, and since if it were a sentient being, I imagined it being a really sweet and terrifying robot, something that's just going to go in there and do the searches, get you the report, and then we're going to be able to write this up quickly. So I know that the Terminator was a large project, large-scale thing. Now, we can get a lot of the functionality of the Cities Digital script simply manually. We can do all of these things. You can do them by yourself. You do not need us to do them. But I think if we walk through it together, I think you'll see how simple it is to kind of jump in there and get something out of this. So the first thing I want to talk about is volumes. Volumes are where the physical data is going to be stored, and there are definitely some best practices in terms of how we set this up and how it's going to operate within the system. And you can see kind of the array of how a Laserfiche environment works with a Laserfiche server in the database and pushing it to the volumes. So you want to be able to keep these to around 20 gigabytes is the typical standard. When we performed the system audit for an organization that may be very close to here, we found that the finding was not using rollover volumes. So there was just one big volume there in place. And limiting it to 28 gigabytes really, really helps in terms of backing up, in terms of getting the stuff off-site. But as our Director of Support, Mike Richardson, would say, the volumes, setting up the rollover times, that's really good and important, but it's frankly not enough. always make sure that you actually back up your databases as well. You need the whole system backed up. Otherwise, you're going to be like this dumpster fire here, which is a synonym I use for the sports teams that I support that always let me down. So you want to get the whole thing in place, but also you're saying, okay, well, backing up my stuff, that's really good. If you set your volumes to rollover, so remember 20 gigabytes is that sweet spot that you'll actually have better search results as well. And the system will perform faster because instead of looking through hundreds of gigabytes of data to find those particular items, it's going to be parsing just the relevant volumes. So Laserfiche knows to just search the correct volume, and that will help an overall efficiency standpoint. Yes?
Let me interject on that volume for a minute, and also let me explain further to everyone about sports teams that Ryan made reference to. He's originally from Cleveland, so during football season, it's really painful to come into the office on Monday for him to talk to us in Seattle, but he had a pretty good night last night. For those of you that weren't watching the NBA, you know, Cleveland had a really great night. But anyway, I just want to talk really quick about those volumes because I know we have a lot of users here that aren't maybe the IT administrators and might be kind of curious what the volumes really are. Just to kind of back up for a second, those volumes are where all of the data is being stored. The images, the documents are being stored in the volumes. So if you're searching on indexing information, if you conduct a search in Laserfiche for template data, that's going to be in the SQL Server. If you do a full text search, that's going to use the search index, and that is going to search all of those little text files. And again, if you're not one of the folks in the IT department, you might not have ever seen this, but all those image files are paired up usually with a text file, and they're stored on your network drive. So where this comes into play and where it's useful for you to learn about these logical versus rollover volumes that Laserfiche created is that let's imagine that you've had Laserfiche for a number of years. You might have started it out and total amount of images in the system might only be a couple gigabytes. So not very big, not even enough to roll over into this whole new volume. So instead of just volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, and just keeps filling new volumes. Why would we do that? Because if you have it over time, you might have many, many, many gigabytes, if not many terabytes of data stored in there. So some of our customers in Washington and Oregon have in the magnitude of 20 to 30 terabytes of data. And that is hard to break up, no matter who you are. That's hard to break that up and get that onto the right storage medium. So if you have it in volumes, that means you can take 2 or 3 volumes and push them off to the new SAN at a time. You don't have to do the whole thing. So that's why you want to consider breaking things up into different volumes. And a logical volume set will create the next volume for you and just keep filling it up. Now to extend that just a little bit further, with volumes, what else you can do with them is, let's imagine you have volume 1 and 2, and now you're up to volume 100 or something like that over many years, and you're running backup, and you've got 20 or 30 or terabytes, or maybe you have 100 gigabytes, whatever it is. You have all that storage, and you don't want to back up all that stuff that you scanned 10 years ago because you know you're keeping it, because a lot of times people do, they keep it permanently. So you can just mark that read only and archive that data, you know, put it on a DVD or something and archive it as read-only in Laserfiche. So that takes a whole segment of your data and then it's read-only. You don't have to back it up every single night. The databases can be backed up every night, the SQL Server database for sure, but the images can be archived out of the system or put in read-only format. Does anybody have questions about that? Make sense? Oh, yes, there we go. Good question. Okay, so the question is archiving the data out of the system. What is that exactly? So you can do one of a few things. You can do you can just mark it read only and make a copy of it and put it like the image files, right? You can just make a copy of the image files and put those on a DVD or something. But you can export out of the system, which is even better. And then you can also detach the volumes. So exporting out of the system, if you said let's export a volume number 1, let's export it. That means it's going to give you all the images and all the metadata, everything to recreate that volume in a brand new Laserfiche system. So you could export it all out, and the database is going to go out in an XML file. And then you're going to have a whole collection. You have the image files in a bunch of directories, and you're going to have the XML. And then you can just burn that to a DVD, and if you wanted to remove it from the Laserfiche system, you could detach it. And a detach will not only export it, but it will also just remove all the content from the database. So again, if you have some pretty old data that nobody searches anymore, or maybe you figure isn't relevant anymore, but you still want a copy of it somewhere, the detach might be a good option. Now, what if you have a whole bunch of information in the system and you want to move to a logical volume set, but you don't have one right now? You're one of the folks that has the default volume that has 200 gigabytes in it. Because that exists, people have that. And you say, well, now I want to go to a logical volume set because I do want some data over here and I want some data over here. It's called migrate documents within Laserfiche. So the migrate function is what will move documents from one repository to another, or one volume to another volume. So you can just select a whole lot of documents all at once through a search. Like, show me all documents created this year or 10 years ago, exactly like 2006, show me all documents. You can select all those and migrate those to a 2006 volume that you might create. Just another way to handle that. You can set security on the volumes separately and independently as well. So if you have an organization that has a highly secured set of data, like some of our customers, I don't know if the lottery is still here. Is the lottery still here? Anybody from the lottery here? No? Nobody's here still? Okay. I saw them earlier. They were here. They, by the way, are the 21-year customer. So anyway, the state lottery might have some data that's very, very old and very highly secured, or your organization might have HR files, or maybe you have a police department as part of your organization. It is easy to say, let's have these volumes over here for the police department as an example. That volume we want to secure, and we want to put that on a separate SAN. We want to put that on the police department SAN, and we want the city government SAN or data storage to be over here. That's a really great way to use volumes. So questions about that? Question about volumes? Anybody? Any more? Yes, sir.
So if you say you have the 200 gig default volume, but the information in that, stuff from 15 years ago, occasionally updated, can you still support logical volume?
Yes, you can support logical volumes if you still need to update data that might be, I think it's 15 years old or so. But if you mark it read-only, then that won't work. Because if you do mark a volume read-only, the images are read-only, but also the metadata. So if you have to update a tag or update a field or something, it's still marked read-only that way. So just keep that in mind. So hopefully we learned a little bit about volumes, and I'll let Ryan keep going. Keep going.
Okay, we did learn a lot about volumes. All right, next up, we've got a little bit about the recycling bin. A quick fun question. I've got a couple extra lunches here, and you can take one of them home if you can answer which version of Windows is this recycle bin from? Any guesses? Correct answer is Windows. Oh, go ahead, Isaac. 98 is correct. You will be going home with one of the extra lunches. Thank you, Isaac. So the recycle bin is a security feature that protects an organization from inadvertently deleting files and folders from Laserfiche. The recycle bin will temporarily and securely hold content that users have deleted until it is purged, at which time records can no longer be recovered from the Laserfiche repository. The recycle bin is really an important tool. However, if not properly managed, it can get out of control and just be another place for irrelevant data to be stored. So these were the findings of one of our system audits. So having the recycle bin available, having documents in it, also setting a time limit for how long they are purged. And also taking this a step further, sometimes we can see people have folders called recycle bin, and that's a way to kind of circumvent the access to have Laserfiche to use that recycle bin there. And so we certainly don't need to do that. I know that if you're concerned about being able to search recycle bins, Laserfiche 10 allows administrators to search across recycle bins, but they are secure for each individual user, irrespective of user access rights. Template fields. So templates are a really important part about Laserfiche. I think that if you want to get the most mileage out of your system, you're going to need to use template fields effectively, and you're going to need to be consistent with them. With these actions, we're able to run reports, do effective searches, launch workflows really leverage not just a collection of TIFF documents, but have something greater and something better. And so this part of the system audit would focus on how are those templates being filled out and how many are they, how many are being used at all. And when we run the search, we can find document counts, and we've got some notes here on the right saying that most of the fields are not populated. We can get an idea on the bar graph here how many there are. And really what we're focused on here is getting effective data into the system and not having useless choices available. If there's a template available that no one is using that's got 2 documents in it, maybe it's time to consider retiring that template or merging it with another one. This is that very specific search that you can run to find no template assigned to documents. And when multiple fields, that second box there at the bottom is the one that really jumps out at me. Multiple fields are not being populated. This is the bigger question when you start like asking, is this on purpose? Is this necessary? Is this the way we want to run a repository? Are there ways we can simplify adding data to get this information in the system without asking the user to do more or be better? I think that everyone wants to be better. Everyone wants to get all the template information right, but they don't always do it. And if we can make their job easier and more accessible, I think that they'll actually do that. So one of the ways we can do that, we can have drop lists, which we'll get into in a minute, but we can also do lookups into other third-party databases or even Excel sheets with information where if you add some of the data, the rest of the data is filled through a lookup. But Laserfiche Forms also is really nice. We've seen quite a bit about that recently, and kind of from a 10,000-foot level, you can view Laserfiche Forms as data collection, right? It's getting the data there. You can have documents come and the data too. And when you do that, what you're effectively doing is taking the burden of template information and that information about those descriptions of the document, all that metadata, and you're putting the burden on an outside or external person. And that's really, really nice, and I think one of the great things about Laserfiche. So to go briefly into actually making some changes to templates and metadata, and now this isn't something you should just completely do willy-nilly. This is something that should be done and thought out. But you can certainly go through the admin console. You can easily add fields, remove fields, make them required. And one of the new things in Laserfiche 10, of course, is the ability to require a specific field of a template for a specific field for a specific template, but not require the same field for another, but you might collect it on another. So that's kind of a nice thing that was changed. I know a lot of organizations had to do quite a bit of work around to get that functionality previously. But it's very easy to do. It takes a couple of moments, really, to add a field or to delete a field. And actually, now that I'm reflecting out a little bit more and I'm thinking about that earlier section when Michael was talking about taking 16 forms and making them into one, I think there's a lot of fertile ground here where we can take a whole bunch of different templates and kind of merge them together and maybe simplify processes. And again, fewer choices, help from external lookups, easier drop lists and that kind of thing will make people do their job. And if the tools are there to facilitate ease, people will take advantage. So these are those dynamic fields, the drop-down lists. I know internally when we use these for some of the proof of concepts that we've built, we often do these with like an advisor. And if you click the right advisor, it'll populate additional data about the office and other stuff that then I don't have to click, then I don't have to type, then I don't have to add. So these are definitely something that you can take advantage of. So now looking into file structure. Now I remember earlier today we talked about copying folders. We talked about having a very complex folder structure in place and what's the value. And just to reiterate, I think that when you've got different views and different rights, a complex folder structure actually might seem simple to another individual. So it certainly is something worth having. With Laserfiche in general, we're just trying to have logic, really. We want to have consistency and logic in place. And I know every situation is different. Every organization is a snowflake. That's what I tell everyone. But having consistency is really, really super important. And so I will ask a question in the audience, just a show of hands. Who allows end users to, or generally allows end users to make and create folders. Anybody? So and that can work in the right situation to have people do that, but it also kind of opens up a floodgate that potentially in certain areas where people will have their own way of doing things and have their own folder structure. And if we are relying on folder structure to be consistent, utilizing workflow is a really great way to do that. If someone decides to change things or do something their own way, now we're taking a step back and maybe we're starting to rely on the metadata and the searches. So now we've got that fail-safe there, but it may or may not be there. So I think in general, if possible, try to keep file folder trees locked down, certainly at the root level. To have a certain level of consistency that will make the repository more accessible to users. Because maybe it works for you now, but what if you win the lottery and you piece out two weeks later, there's someone else who has to pick that up, and I have to understand your logic and do all that good stuff too. So we're really thinking about the long-term health of an organization, and that means consistency, really. Okay, so these were the findings. We've got some common ones here, like a folder called test. Again, we're trying to have as little as possible in the repository that's junk, is kind of what I'm viewing this as. Making sure that the documents have files in them. Again, the recycle bin, folders that are being used as a recycle bin. And, you know, I've actually seen this kind of being taken a step forward. Patrick and I met an organization last week that talked about how they had active and inactive client accounts, and they were using ZZZ to indicate that on the repository. And while that works, I think the ultimate goal is if you're consistent even with something like that, you can, with a good folder tree and folder structure, then later do something really dramatic. Like they're able to take that, because they've got good naming conventions, they're able to separate all of those client files that are active and inactive, and that has a huge benefit on the system if they're, say, want to run a workflow on all of their data. If you're going 15,000 versus 15,000 total, 3,000 active, everything that extends towards just focusing on the active is going to be more efficient, it's going to be faster, it's going to be easier to do, you're going to get better response time. Things are just generally better. When you're churning over large amounts of data, active and inactive, that can be, it's just not as quick. It's not as good. You don't get as much buy-in when you're doing things like that. And that all stems from having like good file structure. They've got it separated where they're able to break that up fairly easily. And they even probably move it to a read-only volume. Okay, access rights. Access rights are a big deal. I actually want to skip a couple of slides and go right to this idea here, groups. Who's using groups? Raise your hand. I use groups. Oh, okay, so I'd say a good majority probably are using groups. Now the difference between groups and setting up users at the system level is that I think when you are setting up groups, you're really setting up a long-term health situation at your organization. When you examine your user rights, if you're assigning them for like, hey, Ryan's new, let's get him signed up, let's get him access to some of these certain client files that he's going to be working with, that might work that day. That might work just then. But if you magnify that situation over the in and out, the onboarding, the exiting of employees, you'll see that by creating specific roles of users, you can easily onboard, give rights without having to examine and talk to the individual. So in this sense here, we're looking at a repository groups here, and we've got some groups on the side. We can set the access rights at this level and not at the user level. We can create additional roles. It could be like HR admin, HR scanning tech. I mean, you could have a whole bunch of different roles. And what will happen is it might be a lot of work. You might spend 10 hours setting up different roles and security rights for a person who does this specific job. But over the long-term impact of your organization is going to be, yeah, it's super easy to get somebody new into Laserfiche, assigned with the correct rights, because all I do is give them a full user and put them in the right groups. So groups are super important. I really think they're great. We should all use them every day. And here we can look at some of the access rights. here, affected rights, access rights, things that they're allowed to do, things that they're allowed to manage in the Laserfiche system. And here's what we found with our system audit here. Definitely don't want to allow users to change root access folders. And yes, groups. I can't say it enough. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with setting up a new user. It's pretty straightforward, just going to the appropriate repository and adding them and giving them the appropriate rights. But you don't even need to assign these. You can just leave them blank if you were just jumping right into adding the user, putting them in the group. And it's the similar process here.
Let's pause for a second.
Okay.
We need a little more detail that I want to share with everybody about users and groups when they're doing this audit. And they're taking a look at the security in their system. In the audit that you receive from us, we go through and take a look at the access rights that are applied to the folders. So there's two things for our users, our administrative users here, or IT administrative users that have control in the system, is that access rights are what allow you to see certain folders. This is a big confusing point for users. So access rights are what you would assign on those folders. If we went back a few, I think, well, I don't know if actually if you had a screenshot of it or not, but on the folders. So the root folders, which users and which groups have rights to those document sets. So think of those folders on the root. For most of our customers that use Laserfiche, those root folders usually mirror departments, typically, or record series, most often. And so a lot of times you're able to go in and say, okay, what access rights do we want to permit to those users? And like Ryan was saying, you really most often never want to have root access allowed to your users because you don't want to have a new folder just pop up on the root. And what we find in the audits more often than not is that there are root folders that people had created because they did have access rights, and to your end users then that is just all the more confusing. There's more root folders, there's more things to look through. So you would definitely want to be able to set access rights to no access rights on that root folder and only the specific document series, record series, or departmental folders they need to have access to. But also, going back to the groups comment that Ryan was making, what's nice about that is if you tie your Active Directory groups to your Laserfiche groups, that makes it even easier, right? So you add a user to your Active Directory group, and they're now part of the Laserfiche group, which is great. If you do the manual override on the individual user accounts, then you end up in a situation where, and this is where our technical guys and the people who set up the system are more knowledgeable than I am, but which particular check marks allow versus deny, a full allow versus a full deny, and which one has the rights. So you end up fighting over the user rights versus the group rights in the system. And if you avoid the individual user rights, you save a lot of headache. So going back from, we looked at the access rights, talking about that on the folders, then we have the privileges on the individual user or group. So what feature rights do they have and what privileges? Feature rights would be something like, can they export out of the system? Can they print? Can they edit the text or search even? I mean, you can take away search in the system. Funny story that you may not know of is that we actually used to have we had a client who said to me one day, well, I'm so excited to get this Laserfiche going. I'm so glad you guys got it set up. We're going to go fully paperless with this thing. I said, okay, well, great. That's a great initiative. Obviously, we want to do that. So a couple of weeks went by, and we started getting all these phone calls from his office, and people were saying, I don't know what's wrong with this Laserfiche system you set up, but I can't print. I can't print anything. And I said, well, let's look at that. We'll go ahead and we'll see. Do you have an error code? And then, it was like, 50-50, no access rights or something like that. And so we looked at it, it was, he took away the print rights for everybody. So we went back to the IT administrator and said, hey, it would be a great idea to let your users know that they're not even allowed to print. So you can do that in the system, but conversely, you can say they can't export either. They can't export an electronic document. And that's also a feature right in here. For some of your users, that might actually be a really good thing to turn off the right to export documents. Then we get down into the assigned privileges, which is a privilege more an administrative right. So you shouldn't, typically your users that aren't administrative level, IT administrative level, shouldn't have those privileges. So you might want to check that on your groups as well. And that's something that we go through in the audit as well and identify which users have which access rights within the system for you.
And I would certainly parrot that the comment about getting stuck in the privilege loop. If you kind of set them on the individual and also have them in the group, it can really get messy because which checkbox you've got where you've made a mistake can be tough to find. All right, next, image quality. I know we went into this in detail, so I'm going to kind of gloss over this, but generally speaking, you want to do spot checks now and again. Check the DPI quality. In a nutshell, to sum up everything that Dan went over in such detail, 200 DPI is considered the standard minimum. 300 is great. Like that's kind of my rule of thumb there. I know that different states kind of have different opinions on that, but I think that generally speaking, 300 DPI is considered high archive quality level. And here's another cool image comparing DPI. Okay, next thing I'd like to talk about is duplicates. Clearly identifying what document is in can alleviate a heck of a lot of headache if you're searching for something, looking for something, and knowing if to exist. And the way really to look for the documents, if Laserfiche sees a document and then sees it is a duplicate in terms of name, it'll add a number to the end. So it'll just keep going like Ryan 1, Ryan 2, Ryan, and keep on going. And really this is one of those things that it's best to prevent from happening. If you can stop it from even being in place, you won't have to deal with it going forward. You need unique identifiers. You need to take advantage of the tokens in Laserfiche to prevent this, and sometimes you have to get creative with it. If you're turning out a lot of documents, you might even have to be like, the specific time that the document was created might need to be that last token in order to differentiate the documents. But there isn't a really good way to deal with duplicates other than going through those again. So the best medicine here is definitely prevention. Untitled documents. I thought this was funny. A blank slide for untitled documents because that's how terrible they are. Untitled documents, these are very, very, very much a pain. And in the same vein of preventing it before it happening, untitled documents are difficult to deal with without literally opening the document. You've got no information on what it is. You're going to have to look at it. There's not going to be an easy way to workflow your way around this. Even with quick fields, you don't know what kind of session you're going to be using. This is a whole lot of work and certainly not worth dealing with. But it looks in this system audit, this actually is pretty good. There are only a few documents with untitled here. And
does anybody know how the untitled actually happens in the system? How that happens? Okay, it seems kind of obvious, right? That's when your users don't put a name on the document. It's pretty straightforward, right? They scan it in because if it was an electronic document or if it was snapshotted in, you would have already had the title that came from the network drive, or you would have had the title that was on the web page or whatever they're printing. It would have come in with a descriptive name. But if it's untitled, that means that they scanned it. So they click scan, they didn't title it, and Laserfiche just defaulted untitled. Which, by the way, you can set up auto naming features in scanning, just in case anybody didn't know that. You put like a username and doc type or something. But that means they didn't put anything on it, and they just dropped it into Laserfiche as untitled. And this is one of the actual highest numbers in the audit we normally see. So this repository was actually pretty clean. Whoever had this one done. But you know, we'll see untitled in the thousands. And so that means there's documents that have been scanned in that just, you know, they're just in there. They might be in a folder. So an untitled document can be in a folder like accounts payable, invoices, 2018, or 2017, whatever. It would be in a specific folder and it would be untitled. So you know generally what document type it is, and it might be searchable. It might be OCR. But still, documents untitled, that's untitled. Nobody wants that. So what's nice in the audit is that you would be able to, when you execute that search, you would be able to find all the untitled documents in your repository. And by the way, this will be available to you. We'll email it out after the user group, so you don't have to worry about jotting down the syntax for the text search. We'll send that out to you, so if you want to go back to your own repository and run this search and check it, you'll be able to. And you'll also be able to search on this one, which is the duplicates. It's not necessarily exactly a duplicate of the file, just to be really clear. It's not necessarily that you have an exact carbon copy of every single one of those. What it really is saying is that in the same directory, we have a document with exactly the same name. And Laserfiche will not allow you to have another document with exactly the same name in that same folder. So it has to do the one, I'm sure you've all seen that, the 2, the 3, the 4, etc. And the same thing on folders. So it will do a folder. If there's another folder in that same parent folder, it will assign new folder 1, new folder 2, or excuse me, new folder 2, new folder 3, et cetera, et cetera. So you end up with all that, and that's, again, unsightly and looks like it's unplanned and probably accidental. So this search will give you all of those in a result list, and you can go through and just take a look at the path in the search results. You create a column that shows you the path, and you can see where they all are, and then make a decision. Is this intentional? Do I want to keep this? Should I assign this to somebody? And then, if you're running Rio or Avante, a great idea for you is to go ahead and assign a workflow with a tag. So you can go through and select all of those untitled's and say, here, somebody go ahead and work on these and tag it, and it'll either email notify someone or put them into another shortcut into a folder for them to look at, or you could save the search and then have them go ahead and run that search later. So those are all good tactics as far as the duplicates and the untitled documents. And again, all these searches will be available to you to run, so you can run your own audit and get back.
Moving on, OCR, I feel like we've covered this pretty extensively, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this one really quickly, but here's the context search. Those context hits you get, if you are OCRing your documents, but they're untitled, you'll still get some value out of it. You'll get those context hits. It won't be as good to launch workflows. It won't be as good to kind of manage and change your data, but you'll at least be able to text search, and that does have value. So it's good to be able to make sure that you've got those in place. Here's the search for that, and again, you'll be getting the search. And in this particular repository, we found just under 19,000 documents, and that might seem like a lot. I've seen 350,000 on OCR documents, so it's not completely crazy. But this is something that you can chunk down, run the search, do a few at a time, or we talked about kind of at length earlier that using the distributed computing cluster to do something as well. So you're able to leverage your network. If you're on Rio or Avante, you have access to this. If you're on Rio, you have a much larger access to this. And again, using that computing power after hours to get the OCR, to generate pages, to do some of that extra stuff. And that is really a super handy feature that is available to you. I should note that, though, if a document is password protected, it's not going to be able to be OCR because it won't be able to be opened. So this will work for generally most documents, but certainly not absolutely everything.
Quick question for you again on this. Can you figure out which version of OCR you did at that point in time? We've got documents that are really old that were OCR a long time ago. The OCR on the end are amazing. So do you have an ability to actually identify which ones have which version of OCR done on them?
Patrick, do you have any information about like any metadata that's associated with the OCR engine?
I don't believe there's any metadata outside of the actual OCR engine version, but you could do a modified date for the document creation date, and that would give you at least kind of a ballpark. Like, well, this is from 10 years ago. All of these ones were a really long time ago. We saw the search results are there. More recently, you could just do all of those and then run the DCC, the OCR, and just let it run. And that'd be a heavy motivation.
So the question was about rerunning OCR on older documents that use a different OCR engine, and Patrick's solution was to use a date delimitator so that you would just be focusing on older documents, and that way you could ensure that you were hitting the OCR and the DCC on older documents only and improve those search results. It's a good idea. Zero-page documents, these are documents that don't have any pages at all, no images associated with them. This is the search for zero-page documents. I think that nowadays we generally see that second box at the bottom there, that zero pages can be from forms being misconfigured, but these are essentially images that have no value. There's nothing there. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to evaluate. There's nothing. So these are simply worth deleting.
There's a couple other reasons why you might have zero-page documents. And I'll just add to this.
Sure.
I run into this with customers who have quick fields. How many people here have quick fields? Yeah, okay, so almost everybody, really. It looks like quite a few of you. So quick fields in older versions have had some issues, and also a lot of our customers run into just a snag here and there. But quick fields is used consistently every day. Many, many, many documents going in every day. And so if you have one of those days where you have a hiccup, or maybe storage was maxed out that day, and QuickFields couldn't store the documents, right? Like that's just an example of one of these ways where you can get hundreds of zero-page documents in there. So somebody was scanning, and they tried to store through QuickFields. It enters in all the records in the SQL server, because that's the way SQL does, or the way QuickFields does it. It'll create all the records, and then it tries to push the documents through, and it gets error, there's no storage on it. So we've had that happen before, and all these zero-page documents are created, and QuickFields doesn't actually store the documents. So that's happened in the past. So if you look at this customer, they had 9,240 documents with 0 pages. Now, that could be just a metadata record, right? You could actually have a separate quote-unquote document in the system that doesn't have any pages, but it's just referencing what is a physical object. That would have 0 pages. There's nothing there. You know, it's just a metadata record only. So you got to be careful about that. But in many cases, what Ryan's also talking about here is that you could have documents where he's talking about forms, but you could also have snapshot, could be generating, trying to generate and have a 0-page document, or a Word document has 0 pages associated with it. That's very possible as well.
Okay. Tags and relationships. I think that this is one of the underutilized aspects of relationships of Laserfiche. We've talked a little bit about setting up tags, and I now mentioned that example of tagging documents so you have photodocs process them later. It doesn't get as much love recently as workflow has kind of added having a button, doing a search, and having a button, being able to launch that. But there's definitely some value to having tags and setting up relationships in place, and specifically adding comment lines. So if you want to have a tag and have a comment associated with it, it's certainly best to do that, and there isn't a way through some of the newer features of Laserfiche to get that functionality in a different manner. And I guess to kind of go on a tangent a little bit, Laserfiche often has a lot of ways to do the same thing. So there are different ways to accomplish, and based on what's best for your end users, you have to make that appropriate choice. So this is the search for finding tags and relationships. And these are the results from our system audit. I think, though, that generally speaking, the most useful case for tags is for security tags. When you need to quickly lock something down, you can add a special tag to it. That's probably the most commonly seen use case that I have now. In terms of implementing recommendations, so we saw some of the complaints, some of those things wrong, and some of the things that are better. Some of them are easier to fix than others, and I know Michael had mentioned the value of Laserfiche answers, and I think that's something that you should all be on board with. If you've got a support page login, you can log into Laserfiche. This is not an extra charge or anything, and start searching on some of the ways to deal with some of these difficult problems. It's kind of in every situation is different in a lot of regards to many of these problems that arise, and going here is a very easy first step, although you can always contact us at Cities Digital. Now, training, finding who's guilty, finding who did the problem, that's something that we've got a lot of ways to do. Laserfiche 10.1 has that really nice way that you can right-click and see some of the audit trail on that specific document. But as we mentioned, I know Isaac brought it up earlier, that running a search, and every week running a search that has the OCR documents and knowing how many there are, you could set that search to send you an email or different department heads' emails of all the documents created that didn't have OCR document or text with it. And you could have the created by go with that, and you could send that every week. And there could be a level of accountability and reporting in that regard where you're letting people know that that nice created by field there is going to tell on you if you're not at all on board with getting the stuff correct the first time. So that's something that you can take advantage of. And of course, right-clicking and checking the document properties will give you the created by. So yeah, if you can search it, you can create an email notifying report of the process that's happening. Those of you who are lucky enough to have workflow do have a pretty extensive tool, though. If there is some rhyme or reason to what happened and what was wrong, it might be worth your effort to create a workflow to solve those problems, to generate the pages, to OCR the stuff, and get on the same page. And as Patrick alluded to, configuring your quick fields appropriately can also have a pretty substantial impact on getting things right. And as I'm kind of closing towards the end of this presentation, I'm kind of jumping back to the beginning. Modifying your processes is really what you're hoping to do. You're hoping to get more out of your system, more out of your data that's associated with your images, and that might mean examining your processes, adding more people, utilizing products like Laserfiche forms and the Teams aspect, kind of bringing more people into the loop, adding notifications when a certain action happens. These little things can add up over time so that more people can help out, more people are notified, and more people are held accountable. And so having that internal discussion about how can we make our processes better, not just with Laserfiche Basics, but with the new tools and kind of the new people coming on board and whatnot. And hopefully that'll lead towards something like a needs assessment where you're saying, hey, you know, we do this a certain way and it works mostly, but we're having problems here. Let's examine that. What tools do we have? What availability do we have? Maybe I'll post something on Answers. Maybe I'll look on the Solutions Exchange. There are a lot of people doing a lot of the same stuff, and re-examining your processes does have value. The Laserfiche product has changed dramatically in the last few years. You have more tools than the last time you checked. So it can be worth revisiting some of those issues. So examine those processes. I mean, we definitely do have some reporting on things like workflow where you can get the average completion time in each step. Maybe you need a notifier or an escalation clause or some way to kind of move things forward. But you certainly have the tools in place to be able to get more mileage out of your system because you're getting more reporting as well. All right. Does anyone have any questions on the Laserfiche system audit? Do I have a whole bunch of people want to sign up for their free one to get my Terminator in there and do the search and get you the results back? Well, let me know if you would like to schedule something. Certainly, it's easy to do. I think based on some movement I'm seeing at the back, are we getting close to?
Yeah, we're going to grab everyone's name badge just to make sure we have them for next time, and then also you'll be entered into the drawing we're going to do in just like 5 minutes. So you might win the picnic party basket. So this is we're a few minutes ahead schedule, which is great. We started a few minutes early after lunch, so now is the time in which we would open this up to just open forums. So if you have questions that you would like to submit, this would be a good time to submit those questions. And let's see, Lexi, are you with us? Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Hey, no, I actually don't have questions. If anybody is on the webinar and you have a question, feel free to type it in now, and we'll wait, a couple minutes just to see if anything comes in, and I will let you know.
Excellent, thank you. Mm-hmm. That's our person from the sky, from the heavens there. Your voice is just pumped into the room, so we appreciate that. Yes, we have a question right here.
So when you take a look at your volumes, actually, there's tools out there that you can do binary file comparison. I realize it's a little deep, but basically the purpose is so if you have stuff in your repository that you have a PDF here, a PDF here, that got moved, there's a copy. If you can find duplicate files in the volume, is there a way you can actually map it back to the entity ID that you have in Laserfiche where those duplicates might actually sit so you can do a comparison?
Good question. So just to repeat for everybody so they could hear it, is doing a binary file detection, duplicate file detection. So really down to the bit level, really being able to determine that it is an exact replica of the other file. Laserfiche does not have that feature built into it, as you probably all have, well, most of you, any of the IT folks probably already know that. A lot of the companies that pair document management and storage together today will be referencing that as a really big bonus that they have, so they can do file duplicate detection to the binary level. So to answer your question, Laserfiche does not have that, but you could do that with the API. So if you do own the API, you could do that where you can do a a comparison at the file level, and once you have the file number, which is stored in hexadecimal, you know, that fun file name, you could do a lookup in the database and then be able to send yourself a report of where those files are. So nothing built in, but you would be able to build your own connection with the API. Any other questions? Yes, Michael.
And maybe you might have to help me. We were looking here at zero-page documents, right? As part of the audit. Is there a conceivable case where someone might want a zero-page document where, for instance, they got metadata as a placeholder for what might come in sometime in the future?
I think that is possible, and you know, honestly, throughout the entire user community, we've seen every example or every possibility in the system, just about. And when you think about this, a lot of times people will have a parent document, and then they remove pages from it and put it into another document. But like you said, they might have metadata there as a placeholder that they keep. Same thing can go for, gosh, off the top of my head, I'm not sure if records management does this or not, but when you have a document scanned in and then you actually go through destruction, but you retain the metadata, off the top of my head, and maybe there's a user out there on the webinar that knows, but right, yep, the images are gone, and it might actually show as a zero-page document at that point, potentially. I have to double check that, but
actually, I have a business case for the
okay.
zero-page document. Actually, I'm purposely creating a zero-page document because then we talk about to link a property, a map to Laserfiche document. Sometimes if you link to one particular document, then it's fine. You just click the link and opens the document. But in other cases, you don't have one particular document linked to that address. You have a set of documents. So, if like ideally, we're hoping if Laserfiche gives us the way to have the link built into a folder instead of one document. But at this moment, we don't support that feature. So we end up like we have an address with all sorts of documents with this address. The address is linked to the map address. Now you click. We don't want you to like open one of the documents. We want you to go to that folder, that address folder. But we cannot. So we end up creating a dummy document put on the root folder for that address. So when you click the link, it opens that dummy document. And then you can see, okay, I'm in the right spot. You can navigate to the documents to see the document. So in case that we have to create this dummy document with zero-page.
Interesting use case, yeah, definitely. Creating sort of an empty document where you can link many, many different documents to it, but you want it as the sort of the header or the cover page almost for all the other documents underneath it. Interesting.
So you're actually using metadata as a navigation.
Yeah. Another, like I said, you know, everybody's got a different use case. Great idea. Anybody else have, not necessarily comments about the zero-page documents, but if you do have some more about those, anybody have any other questions or maybe polls of the audience, users? Yes, ma'am.
So we just recently upgraded to Forms 10, and we were using 9.2 prior to that. And we're having some trouble with our user tasks now. We log in, and I know I have tasks assigned to me. I'm getting emails about it. Then I go into my tasks, there's nothing there. And then I have to go into like the middle tab there, and then I can see, oh, there are all the tasks, but then I have to assign them to me from there. And that seems kind of cumbersome, like it's taking more time. I don't know if we're doing something wrong or
Yeah, that's something I'd have to take a look at or have our support guys take a look at that. I'm not sure if that's from a 9.10 upgrade, because a lot of times, you know, what I've heard is that tasks have been, before the Teams feature was there have been tasks that are just sort of stuck in Forms, and you upgrade to 10, and they have appeared. So,
yeah, that's it.
Is that it? Oh, okay.
At the time, so.
There you go. So that could be it exactly, and that's something that I'll have the support guys follow up with you on that one. Take a look at that, because do you actually want those tasks to be completed, or do you want them to just go away?
Well, yeah, I want them to just go away so they don't have to work.
All right. Well, we'll talk after the offline. We'll have that. Take a look at that. Any other questions? Any other ideas, thoughts, feature requests that we can pass along to Laserfiche?
Well, we really like to use the Laserfiche encryption feature, but we got into trouble and now we kind of hesitate to use it. We got some advice saying not to use that. It's better to use some like third-party encryption feature because we have all those particular requirements. So the image that you stored on the network, you have to prevent people from backward, from up front when you log into Laserfiche reports, you have all those nice access control, but backward, right? Network admin, they can just go to the file place and then open all those documents. We need to prevent those, otherwise we won't be able to pass the audit. So we turn on the encryption, but all of a sudden some file cannot be opened in Laserfiche, we end up having to back out. So we're still in the waiting mode to see if this is a bug that they can fix or what. But at this moment, we got get some suggestions from consultants to suggest us not to use encryption.
So specifically, we're talking about volume encryption,
Yeah,
and a specific situation where it wasn't turning out to be very successful. I can tell you from my personal experience using the volume encryption, it did slow down our usage on the system because it has to encrypt, decrypt as you're retrieving a document. So some of our hosted customers determined not to use the volume encryption as well. So I can't guarantee that we're having problems with everyone else, like we're being mentioned here, as far as some being open, some not. But and that could be specific to your case, maybe. But we opted not using the volume encryption, at least for now, just because of the speed issue, and that was enough for us as well. Has anybody else tried volume encryption?
So we looked at some encryption files in the back end, and we ended up doing some BitLocker stuff. Is that even an option for you to take a look at the server itself and how it's stored?
Yeah, that's what we suggested.
Okay.
Just store all the sensitive documents on the computer server and then just that's what we suggest.
So for everybody else who maybe couldn't hear that, the solution that's been used by a couple of users here is to do file encryption on the server as opposed to use the volume encryption. BitLocker was mentioned. Okay, so that's one of the solutions. Okay. Anybody else want to talk about any other feature requests? Or by the way, I'll log that as fix as a feature request. How's that? Okay. Yes, we had a question. Yes.
The audit report that you guys so graciously generate, some of those features have actually implemented into the tool, where you can have a dashboard to do some type of reporting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of kind of like Outlook mail rules, where you can basically like select the folder and say, well, accounting folder, I want to make sure that only like members of the accounting group are assigned to the accounting folder. Kind of just do basically an audit report types of things. Configuration tool, in addition to that, that would be very useful.
Yeah, and for the administrators, right? So the comment again. Sorry to reiterate for everybody who could hear you, but for those who couldn't. So to generate more or less an administrative dashboard for security access rights and rules on particular folders. That's been brought up in the past as something that was needed, and we built an administrative dashboard a few years ago. It wouldn't have logged your user access rights, but it was logging input files and total storage and monitoring the drive sets. And we started having so many troubles with our application. We had so many issues with all the different servers and versions that everybody had servers on, and that became a bit of a taxing thing for us. But Laserfiche is tasked with that, or requested many times. But we'll add that again in. And by the way, anybody who has a feature request that you might not think of today, if you put it on answers.laserfiche.com, that's where they take those feature requests. You can either poll the entire user community and say, hey, does anybody have a dashboard type tool, or we would really like to see this from our version 11 if it's possible, and that's where they log that stuff. Great. How about Laserfiche Empower? How many people are thinking about going to that? Great conference. Okay, a few people in here. Check it out online if you get a chance. And definitely one thing I'd recommend to everybody is sign up early, because the sooner you sign up, the sooner you have access to the labs, which fill up right away. So if you want to go and do workflows, labs, and things like that at the conference, do that early. Because if you wait till December, you might find that they're full, and that's a really big disappointment when you get there. Anything else anybody would like to talk about? Any other user type discussion? Lexi, one more time. Maybe anybody from the crowd in cyberspace have any questions?
I don't have anything.
All right. Oh, they're mighty quiet out there. Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, I'll conclude the user group. We'll do the drawing here in just a moment, but we'll let our folks on cyberspace go. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll also just mention that it's these user groups we do for your benefit, and we hope you all enjoy it, and it's you attending, whether by cyberspace or in person. We appreciate you spending the time with us in the afternoon to learn about this, and if you have topics that you want us to address, email us either after the session here or later on down the road. Let us know what you'd like to have covered. In the past, a lot of these sessions are based specifically on what users are telling us they want to hear about. So if you have a topic that you'd like us to go really in depth on, or if you want us to do a full training session in front of everybody for building a workflow or something like that, we'll do that. Just let us know. Send that in. And again, just thank you everybody for attending, and hope you have a great rest of your day.